seconds.
Sure.
All right.
We're clearly ready to speak.
Yeah.
Thank you all for joining us tonight for the Stanford Global Studies Film Festival. This year, the Stanford Center for Latin American Studies was fortunate enough to be able to virtually screen the film 499, a 2020 Mexican-American documentary hybrid film directed by Rodrigo Reyes. Joining us live for a Q&A session is Director Rodrigo Reyes, and serving as moderator, Professor Sergio Quecha from the Stanford Department of Art and Art History. For those of you joining via live stream, feel free to submit your questions and comments via the YouTube chat, and we will read them to the director. Thank you. And now, a brief introduction from Professor Quecha.
Thank you so much. Thank you and welcome to everyone on the stream. So I'm just going to read Rodrigos Bio because I don't want to miss important bits, and there's a lot there. So, based in California, Mexican director Rodrigo Reyes makes films inspired by the complex intersection of migration, history, violence, and resilience. He has received the support of the Mexican Film Institute, Sundance and Tribeca Institutes, ITVS, California Humanities, Latino Public Broadcasting, and more. Rodrigo's work has been featured on PBS and Netflix, and he's a recipient of the prestigious Guggenheim Fellowship, Creative Capital Award, the SF Indie Fest Nonfiction Vanguard Award, and the Rainin Fellowship. And in 2021, he was awarded the William Greaves Fund by Firelight Media and named one of the 40 under 40 by Doc NYC. In 2020, his film 499, which is the subject of tonight's conversation, won Best Cinematography at the Tribeca Film Festival, as well as the Special Jury Award at Hot Docs. Rodrigo is on the board of the Video Consortium and is the co-director of the Media Maker Fellowship with Bay Area Video Coalition Media. His most recent film, Sanson and Me, premiered at the Tribeca Film Festival in 2022. Thank you for joining us today, Rodrigo. I think you wanted to introduce your film.
Oh,
yourself.
Yes. Well, I guess the big question that people would have is why? Why bring this conquistador back? Why do this game or this joining of the past and the present? And I think for me, the very first reason is I didn't want to make a boring didactic film. I didn't want to make a film like a YouTube video that you watch to learn about history. I didn't want to make an informational piece. I wanted something that spoke to this strange permanence of history and the rules of regular documentaries, with experts and and what's funny is I talked to a lot of experts. I talked to some of the leading writers around this idea of the conquest in this moment. And it was awesome, but they were just kind of like the foundation to imagine the film, and it just made a lot of sense. One day I was walking around Mexico and I just saw him everywhere. He was there, and all I had to do was materialize him, but he's already there, So in a way, the film is very much a documentary of a series of symbols and ideas and things that exist. It's not so fantastical, It's like, to me, it feels hyper real because he just allows us to see him, it was a fair gamble that the film made, and the people in the film also agreed, which was the most important thing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Could I open up with a question, and then we can take questions from the audience here and online as well. I guess my big question was, when watching the film, I was curious to hear from you about building that character. How you say that it's a series of symbols, the whole film essentially, and kind of there's nothing in it is to be taken literal. But I'm curious about how you when you saw the conquistador, when you were walking around Mexico and you would see him everywhere, from that point, how did you think about developing a character who is this kind of anti-hero in the film, and what was your process of building a film around this character without having the audience kind of fully on his side in a way? and not becoming a kind of regular protagonist of a film.
Yes, that's a great point. That was the hardest challenge of writing, because we all know these movies like Avatar, Dances with Wolves, where like you have someone who's a stranger in a strange land, there's colonialism happening, but when the camera focuses on them, they're supposed to be a hero, right? And, I understand that, but that in a film about colonialism really kind of destroys the point. And then I had to think, well, not only do I need to build this guy, I need the people living this reality to accept him and to want to talk to him. So it became very clear early on that he couldn't speak back to them. That he couldn't talk to Fatima. What's he going to say to Fatima's mom? Or to Jorge, the son of the murdered journalist in the beginning. And he challenged me a lot, that Jorge did. He said, why? I don't understand. This has nothing to do with what happened to my dad. And we had many conversations until he finally started to see this idea of connecting multiple crimes and multiple actions. Once he started looking at, the film through the lens of what has happened to many journalists in Mexico, and realizing that there was already a history, like almost an ancient history, because there's so much indifference, then it clicked. And he said, I'll let him in. I'll let him into my home. I'll let him meet my family, right? Like him, the character, right? So we had we knew where the conquistadores had been, right? We had like this, we knew what the campaign was, because basically he's writing it's like Julius Caesar or something. We know that. And then I knew what kind of problems existed. And as I built them, I would say, okay, I'm gonna bring together these communities, and then the film will come to life after that encounter. After they come together, then I'll know what we have. And we with Eduardo, the actor, we knew that the film was in 3 stages for the character. In the beginning, he's very proud. In the second stage, he's very confused. And in the third, he's just horrified and he wants to escape. Those were like our markers, but we never knew what the details were. Because we would talk to people, but as you know, like the interviews always change. An interview always changes once you turn on the camera, and we had to be open to that. So the film actually has a ton of footage, extra footage, because we were constantly trying to see, okay, does this work? Does this not work? And some of the folks in the film, like Fatima's mom, Lorena, her condition for us, for her participating in the film was that we had to listen to everything that she had to say and wanted to say, but like in an interview. So we had this 3-hour interview with her that she demanded as because she was coming from a situation where media were interviewing her and asking for the soundbite, and she felt very abused by that. And so she asked us to she set her rules, right? And so we entered that space, and then we had to come out and continue building the film, from there. Like what works, what's the voiceover that's going to be able to guide us in and out of this. So there was a lot of juggling happening, but everything was built on that trust, right? Like they let me bring together the character with their lives, and then from there, we started to structure in the edit, the themes, and try to really make it balanced. But it's a journey, right? At the beginning, it's hard to accept him. We also have to trust that the film is doing something interesting to keep us there. And I think it takes about two interviews for the conquistador to really click as a character.
And because you imposed, I want to talk a little bit about kind of the aesthetics of the film and the cinematography in particular. Because you imposed such a sort of strong style on the film, I want to first ask you where that comes from. Talk a little bit about why the anamorphic lenses, why that kind of width of the frame, and then also how how you manage to then balance kind of still imposing that kind of style and a very kind of strict way of filming in a way, with kind of giving liberty to people to speak their mind, and kind of being able to incorporate all of that reality into the film at the same time.
Yeah, and I think that it goes back to trust. Sometimes people have said, how dare you do this to victims of violence and bring the conquistador? It was a collaboration. And so once part of that collaboration was talking about the method of working. So we would talk and talk and talk before we started shooting, and by then they understood what our method was. It was going to be, like you said, very strict and with this very, for those of you who don't know, like the lenses that the film used, they're very hard to use. You need a very experienced cinematographer to use these lenses, because they capture this wide view, and it isn't just like blocking off part of your screen. There's actually like the lens structure itself squeezes and unsqueezes the image. So we explained that. We just explained that to everyone, and what our needs were, why we were making the film beautiful also, why this emphasis on beautiful cinematography. And I would tell people, well, for me, your story deserves the most beauty, and this is the best I can do. This is the most I can bring, is in my art form is this, right? And really the cinematographer for the film, he was in love with the project, and he said, I've always wanted to shoot a film in this format. And so for him, it was like a personal challenge. And for me, it made sense for other reasons, because this format, if you think, what films have you seen in that format? They're all epics, and they're all about conquest, right? Like they're like gladiators and the Spartacuses and the different films, Lawrence of Arabia, right? And so it was really interesting to bring that into like regular life, and to bring that epic into people's world. And it also helped to make the conquistador and reality meet. The other thing, and it's not the cinematography, but it's the costume and character design. It's just his costume. There's no horses, there's no cannons. It's just very simple, so that they can start to merge. That's all we needed. So you start to believe him as a character, right? And then of course he treated everyone with so much respect that it was easy to work with him as a regular person, because he showed a lot of love to everyone, and he wasn't sitting in the car with air conditioning, watching videos. He was there all the time, talking, feeling. And so I think that helped people to trust us, and to understand they were working with a different, that I wasn't just like a visiting media that was here to take something from them, and they would never hear from me again.
I have one last question before we open it up. Just could you talk a little bit about the time in the film? So you were, the film kind of tries to merge past, present, and future, and I was curious about how you thought about that in developing the film. How you thought about like the way that you wanted the audience to perceive these parallel times running parallel one to another, and what were some of the influences for you when you were developing the film in terms of literature or other films? Like one obvious reference is Arguello Wrath of God, like Herzog's film, but there's probably many others that I'm not aware of.
Well, there's sadly not that many films made about the conquest of Mexico. There's not that many, and even less about this moment. And then time travel films are almost always comedies, almost 99%, right? Bill and Ted, we love those movies, but this wasn't going to be that kind of comedy. It's not Borat, it's something different. But I think the filmmaker that really helped was Kurosawa, because in his later years, he would create these fables of life, right? So he makes these films about samurais fighting, but they're really about World War, post-World War II, the Cold War era. They're about so many other things, and you would see some like the values of that time being taken to another time. And there's this great Spanish-Mexican filmmaker, Buñuel, which I'm sure you're all aware of, and he has a film about a time traveling, that has a time traveling component of like this man who's a hermit, and he's a Christian hermit, and there's like this debate of ideas, and he shows us how those ideas have transformed over time, but for me, I think the biggest thing was just thinking about how history is a process that you could argue is alive, and that transcends our own lifespan, and so slowing that down and trying to reveal these inconsistencies and these contrasts, and focusing on those moments that are hard to pin in time. So like when he goes to that church, and in the middle of the film he goes to this church, right? And the church has a big round window, and he goes up there and he sees this ritual, these voladores, right? I mean, when is that ritual happening? Is it happening today, or is it happening in 1521, right? There's a timelessness to it, and I think that's what I was fascinated with as a child looking at history, was like, wow, like this is here, like right under the surface there's something else, right? And we're always looking at the here and now all the time. So I tried to find those moments where I could show these contrasts. Like when he's in the market and he's walking in the market and he finds Jesus, and he has like a moment there, with Jesus, or at the end where he goes to this pilgrimage. When is that pilgrimage happening? When it's so, there's so many contradictions, right? Like people wearing tennis shoes, t-shirts, but singing, like indigenous music, but also kind of with a modern twist, right? Like it's just, I didn't want to resolve the contradictions. I wanted just to bring him into that, and it was interesting because the process was full of debate, right? Like, so I would talk to my team, and in Mexico in particular, people would feel like, oh, you're just painting our country in this really dark way. And I'm like, well, these contradictions are here, and he's just what's missing for us to really see them, and there's no answer, right? Like you don't know what happens to him really at the end, right? So that idea of the contradiction was very useful. I feel like, especially, in the Latin American studies field, like there's a lot of dogmas in the history of Latin America, right? There's a lot of, this is the solution, no, this is the solution. And I wanted to avoid that, and just let us kind of think about these situations and come to our own conclusions.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Let's open it up now. I have some more questions later, but first let's take some from the audience.
I understand better now that you were talking a bit about how you thought of the character of the conquistador. But the thing that happened to me, and I want you to tell me something to convince me that it does the thing that you want him to do, is that when I saw him, I thought when he appears and then there's a hierarchy or something that makes you see that he is in the present, in our present, his future. I thought, oh, this is interesting. But then, the first thing that came to my mind is, well, probably, what is he going to do? What is he telling us about our present? So all the time, I was just thinking, what is he saying about our present? And I started trying to make connections, and then I thought, well, probably it's the violence. So what I thought is probably what the author is trying to say is that the violence today somehow can be traced to the violence that the conquerors brought. And I thought, but that makes no sense, because these are completely different kinds of violences. And violence is something that changes. So I thought, how is history? I understood that you were trying somehow to bring history to bear, but I still don't get exactly what is the conqueror telling us about history. You see, not
Yes.
because I can understand it, that you're trying to portray different timings, and I get that, but I don't see the main role in telling the story, in the narrative. It's more in the narrative than in anything else.
Well, the methods have changed. but not the substance of the violence, I would
But
argue.
no, yes, because the relationship, because the conqueror, part of the point is that the conqueror saw the peoples like not slaves, because they say slaves, but it was more like animals. The peoples that los Aztecas or los Mayas were not humans.
But they were their allies when it benefited
which
them.
of them. It depends which
Yeah,
of them.
but thousands and thousands. Like the estimates say that there were like 300,000 people fighting for Tenochtitlan, 150 on one side, 150 on the other. I feel like, for me, when I look at him, he's part of a long chain, and the forms have transformed, but the purpose and the goal of that violence hasn't changed. There's a reason why murders of journalists are so high in Mexico, and murders of information. There's a reason why when the conquistadores came, they destroyed a lot of texts, right? There's a reason why collaborations happen, right? Why there's people who are in the army now that are going, into organized crime. The line is so thin between following the rules and, committing an atrocity, right? And so for me, this ghost is there as a mirror. And what's really interesting is I made this film when there was a presidential change in Mexico, right? And the president started saying, Spain needs to apologize, and all our problems are Spanish. And then what was crazy is and then this guy, it's a very easy thing to say, right? And then this guy in Spain for a right-wing party started dressing like a conquistador, which is like, oh my God, you guys are both crazy, because the reality is that the responsibility to stop this history, this reinvention of history, is in the present. It's not in the past. But he has been shown the perspective, right? But the responsibility for what happened to Fatima is not in the conquest, it's in the fact that those methods are repeating, right? And so, Señora Lorena, when we did the tour of the film, we did sessions where there were big talks around the film, and each one was focused on each community, and they curated the conversation. So hers was at the National Commission for Human Rights, and it was so interesting for people to watch this film and then have to deal with what she's living with every day with her case. And at the time, her case was still stuck, and it was torture for her. And her husband was there, and her friends were there, and it made it very clear for her. She's like, there's no excuses. We can, we need to learn about what has happened, only to stop what's going on right now, And so it was really interesting, but the film makes that challenge, right? It's not like, I've been told by people that they feel like their mind is exhausted from wrestling with all the different ideas in the film. And yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think that's the point. Everybody asks me, why is Mexico so violent? Well, I can tell you the why.